Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest on the plans, first mooted last year I think, to help alleviate our transport problems by letting idiots like you or I drive 7.5 tonne trucks without any actual training. What could go wrong? But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, who's refusing to do his job and mediate negotiations in order to avert the strikes he says he doesn't want happening, seems to be filling up his time by coming up with cunning ways to block our roads and reduce our population further. This plan did crop up last year, and although the government are not committing themselves to this lunacy just yet, they do seem ready to go ahead with the next stage. That is, rather than idle speculation, they're going to launch a consultation. The problem is this: we don't have enough drivers, as I shall be discussing quite a bit over the next few months, I suspect. Our current inflationary problems are essentially down to a lack of supply. There's various things in there, but globally there's a lack of supply, hence why lots of major economies are struggling with high inflation. But ours is worse because on top of the global supply problems, we've added supply problems of our own. Raising trade barriers has meant that we struggle to get enough goods into the country. And we are a country very dependent upon imports of basics like food and medicines. And because our exports are really struggling, then we're not even making enough money to buy all the more expensive imports. We cut ourselves off from the European labour market as well, meaning it's more difficult to get workers. When the Bank of England was announcing its latest dire forecast, the governor, Andrew Bailey, said that he has constantly been told by businesses they cannot recruit. The workers just aren't there. And the government can't contradict this because their own figures show the number of vacancies exceeding the number of people out of work. And even if this were not the case, you can't just match people to jobs like that. They may be 200 miles away from the job, so they can't do it. Or they may not have the right skills or experience. I know this is confusing to government ministers whose own jobs are really well paid and don't require any skills, any qualifications, any experience, or even need to be located nearby because expenses will cover your travel. But for the real world, these things matter. And driving HGVs requires skill, and to do it effectively and efficiently, experience. But we have largely lost out now. Our post-Brexit immigration policy makes it unnecessarily complicated to attract workers to come over here and also to actively come over and work in the UK, even when you would qualify for a visa. Because you could work in a different EU country and not need a visa, and also the facilities here are pretty terrible. In fact, MPs have been bemoaning our lack of facilities for drivers. It's a problem that, like every other problem we face, gets worse with the Tory government. Conservatives think that the state should have as little to do with things as possible. That is ultimately where it goes wrong. This means they don't see it as their role to provide infrastructure. They expect the private sector to do that. But why would private businesses spend their profits or development funds to build facilities that can be used by anyone, not just them, including their competitors? Last year, Boris Johnson said that the private sector should train more drivers and build more facilities. But telling the private sector to do something isn't going to achieve anything. If they see it as in their commercial interest, they're going to do so without any prompting from a murder clown in government. And if they don't see it as in their interest, they aren't going to be swayed by said murder clown. If the government want private business to do something, then there are two solutions, always two solutions for the government to get private industry to do something. First, you legislate to force them. Or second, you tax them and then use the money to do it yourself. And the Transport Select Committee has talked about the latter option for better facilities. Give them 2 years, they advise, then tax the wealthier companies and use the money to build. It'll never happen, though, if the Conservatives are still in power. If they were serious about dealing with the issue, they'd have already done so. There'd be no need to wait another 2 years. This is an issue that was raised some time ago. In fact, a lot of the consequences of Brexit were pointed out years ago. So there really isn't much excuse for the government not addressing them now. The reason they don't is because many seem to genuinely believe that if there's a need for something, a business opportunity is conjured out of thin air and private money will come in to sort it. It never happens. I see John Redwood, an entertainingly delusional Tory backbencher, complaining about the prospect of hosepipe bans. He says that the water companies should be making sure that we have as much water as we want. This is another classic case. Water companies were privatised by the Tories on the promise that they would use their capital to invest in modernising our systems. It was a bit like, well, why don't we do that then? Why didn't the state just do that? Oh, I don't need private money. Why? What's different about private money? But anyway, what's happened since, we now have water shortages and they're flooding our waterways with raw sewage. When you take umbrage at this, they complain about the crumbling Victorian infrastructure. It's not our fault, it's the crumbling Victorian infrastructure. Weren't they supposed to use their profits to fix that decades ago? But of course they didn't. What they actually did was paid out tens of billions of pounds in dividends to their shareholders. And even then, it wasn't out of profits. They loaded up debts onto those companies as well. So if they're ever taken back into public hands, we'd be saddled with the debt. The board considers its financial position, and they think to themselves, shall we spend some of our money on better infrastructure, or shall we give them all to our shareholders so that we get to keep our jobs and big fat bonuses? No guesses for which decision is routinely made. So the situation in the UK is as follows. As far as I can tell, first, getting back onto lorry drivers. We don't have enough truck drivers in the country. Second, we cut ourselves off from the easy hiring of HGV drivers from neighbouring countries. Third, what lorry drivers we do have are routinely held up for hours or even days extra, thanks to the hard trade border between Britain and the grown-up countries. Fourth, lorry drivers don't like being stuck in queues for days on end, having to crap in bags and piss in bottles, so they are less likely to want to do this work, even if they can. All of this adds up to a critical shortage of drivers. Brexiteers try and claim that there's a shortage of drivers in the EU as well, but it's not a critical shortage. The shortage in the EU is there's not as many drivers as they would like. Also, several EU countries are actively investing in better infrastructure like good quality service stops and driver training. So they're actually doing something about the shortage. So their shortage is not critical and they're doing something about it to prevent it becoming critical in the future. Our shortage is critical right now. And what are our government doing it? Are we building better service stops? No. Are we building better overnight parking facilities? No. Are we training more drivers? No. So what are we doing? We're going to let people like me, who have never driven anything bigger than a family saloon, drive a 7.5 tonne lorry around the country. And to make it even better, they're not even as bothered as the EU about whether or not we've had enough sleep while we're bouncing around narrow roads with our 7.5 tonne death machine. I mean, what could go wrong? And when people who don't have the experience or training to deal with, for example, massively increased blind spots, tight roads, because remember, these 7.5 tonne trucks, they're not the ones going to warehouses. They're the ones going to the corner shop. So navigating down tight roads, cars parked on both sides, difficult parking when you actually get there, tricky manoeuvres, and everything that comes with driving delivery trucks like this, when they get themselves into trouble, causing damage or even injury, won't be the government that gets the blame for letting the unqualified drive the trucks, will it? Yet again, they want people struggling to dig us out the hole that the Tories have made and take all the risks themselves as well. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.